All right. Welcome everyone to our next meeting of the School Community and Wellbeing Committee. Glad to see everyone here. We have a new face in the crowd and would love to introduce our Deputy Director of Research. Jen, if you could just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll also go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Brandon Best. I'm the Ward 6 rep on the state board. And would love to just hear a little bit about you.
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon. My name is Jen Briones. Bernice sent an email introducing me to all of you members. And this is my second week on the job, but as you said, I am the new Deputy Director of Policy and Research. So I have a background in education policy, research analysis, education data, credential data, a lot of connecting teachers with the policymaking process. I have my master's degree in public policy from George Washington University. And I live in Ward 6 in Navy Yard, the part that is in Ward 6. So proud DC resident, of course. And I wanted to join your meeting this evening so I could introduce myself. You could put the face to my name, and I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Jen. Really do appreciate you being here and look forward to doing a lot of great work with you. Today's meeting, Darren has put the agenda in the chat. We're going to start off by just having a brief review of our previous meetings. And the very first part of it was identifying some overarching projects. In our last meeting, we kind of narrowed it down into like 3 categories, which was school safety, mental health, and the Healthy Schools Facilities Network. In that meeting, we talked about school safety, which we actually have to come up with a working definition of what that means for us so we can update and put that into our website. That's something that we're going to have to talk about later on. But when we talked about school safety in our last meeting, Robert had suggested, having a panel, which is what we just did, and we're going to talk about the panel in a bit. But we also wanted to, I wanted to get input from the team. In our last meeting, we talked about, hosting the panel, doing research, having community outreach, and analyzing what school safety looks like in other regions, with the goal of creating possibly like a state of the school safety and mental health report. And just wanted to talk to some of you, how does that sound? The goal, I think, from where we left off, and Robert, please correct me if I'm wrong, and Darren, please correct me if I'm wrong as well, was that we wanted to identify what is currently taking place and what are the gaps so that it could help us inform some next steps as we move forward. Cool. If it sounds good.
Sounds right to me. Yeah.
All right, cool. And Carlene, just wanted to check to see how that sounds, I guess, right now. And obviously, I know that's putting you on the spot, but I can always come back to you later on if you want to provide some more thoughts.
I think I have some initial thoughts, and that is my initial gut instinct is we do a lot of reports. A lot of reports happen in our city without action. And while I'm all for figuring out the baseline, my gut says we might already have some of this information between the student advocate already does a pretty thorough evaluation of students. I think when I first started on the board, they had 800 students respond to a survey, which pretty good, I thought. The best survey I've ever heard. Yeah. So I just wonder if we already have some reports that we can pull from. I also wonder, last year, Representative Thompson ushered through a resolution on something about safety. I think blocks around schools, something like that. And I don't know if we hit all the next steps. A piece of me is I can't remember all that's in it, but we we frequently talk about like, or we were previously talking about like we pass resolutions, but making sure that we close the loop on all the steps that were in that resolution. So I want to look to see if we actually close the loop on that. And then finally, like I'll just keep repeating. Like I am personally fresh off of about 3 weeks ago, 2 back-to-back shootings in front of my home, which is in front of a school. And it just kind of brought up to me again of like, our blocks for children to like the block immediately, well, typically the block immediately where students proceed, they're like a bunch of safe passage workers, usually right there it's safe. And one, it was just a big change in like, we were like, whoa, I've lived here 10 years, never had that happen on that block right in front of the school. But then our community members frequently remind us of like, it's not just always this block where schools are on, but then what is happening in the blocks that kind of feed into schools and how do students feel about the commute, not just, right there on that initial stretch of like, here's the doorway, but what's happening when the bus drops me off 2 blocks away and I have to walk, or what's happening on the bus. Talking to students at Balloon, and my goal is to pull together the notes from the Balloon and Anacostia talks. But yeah, so I guess all I have to say of like, before we dive into like a report, are there already reports that exist? What are all the next steps from the previous resolution on safety? Is there something that we can do collectively? Like I know Representative Thompson went to all of her ANCs and basically got them to adopt the resolution. But like that was one representative. It would be interesting to see if like there's a collective that we can do as a body, or if we can get council involved, somebody involved of like, how do we just look at the blocks around schools? We also previously passed a resolution where we looked at traffic safety around schools, which I believe then Councilmember Janice Lewis-George picked up. And she kind of created that, like her and the DOE, like they did like a tag team kind of safe blocks related to traffic safety. But like, it's like, now, can we do something related to community safety? What are the elements of community safety that just should be standard for all schools to kind of just have, or I don't know, but I think those are my thoughts. And I'll summarize. Do we have reports? Whatever we have to do with the previous resolution, and then from there, figure out like what our next steps are.
Thank you so much. Very, very insightful. Darren, I took some notes. I don't know if you had notes as well, but so we can make sure that we go back and check out what else is readily available out there. Also, thank you for the insight about the blocks outside of those first couple blocks, because I know exactly what you're talking about. In the last meeting, we had also. By the way, is it okay for me to move on, everyone? Okay, great. In the last meeting, Robert had discussed like the coordination of agencies. So kind of like figuring out like what's going on with each agency, so that we can fill in the gaps or identify the gaps first and then fill those in. So that's something that we're looking to do. And then I know, Carlene, you also was sharing some of the information on sexual assault, and I think that we're also adding that if it has not already been added to the work plan. And then with that, the last part, which is something that came up a little after our meeting though, but I wanted to add on to it as well, was the seizure safe schools legislation, which I think we all know about right now. So that was what was going on under the school safety, under mental health. Once again, Robert had another, once again, good suggestion where we're talking about having the mental health inventory, where we're figuring out, once again, what's going on, what's working, and, kind of looking at, what other agencies are working on to help frame the context for our members. I also suggested researching mental health supports for students not identified as being in crisis, which could also lead to future advocacy work for us. And then that leads us off to our Healthy Schools Facility Network. I know that we have some updates coming up in a few. And so I just wanted to say if there are any questions around that work, or if there was anything that we wanted to add to the work that we're doing right now or that we have proposed.
I'm a little unclear on like how much of that work is falling to us, or because like Ebony Rose and Fraser are part of a committee that's doing that work, right?
On the Healthy Schools Facility Network?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are part of that. Yeah. I don't have the answer right now, but I think that's something where maybe we could do some coordination offline to move forward with that. And I can get back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, Morelli and I definitely connected today and just discussed that work. So yes, it would be that work is ongoing. I believe Morelli can share a little bit, like a quick update on that, but it is ongoing.
Yeah,
Great.
and so right now we're just waiting for funds to be loaded. It is taking a bit of time, but as soon as we get that going, we are going to start the process of contracting a vendor for that work. And that's just something that is happening in the background right now, and we will update as soon as we get any updates from that part of it, that budget aspect of piece of it. But what I do see happening is that this committee may push this work further than the report that the Healthy Schools Facilities Network is developing, because there will be a lot of things coming out of that, such as plausible resolutions for other agencies to consider in terms of sustaining healthy school facilities, that I would foresee this committee pushing through and working to navigate and really make it a part of DC to advocate for better facility spacing. So that's something that I am seeing currently, but I will provide and work with Jen and Darren as I transition out of the board to help make that clear for you all as soon as we provide more updates, get more updates.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work that you've done. It's going to be sad to see you go, but I look forward to hearing about the work that you've done on school safety. And so we're going to hear about that in a few minutes. But before that, what I want to do is kind of like just have a review of our panel discussion. Like, how did you all think it went? What are some glows and what are some grows that we can take so that we can continue to improve, our outreach and, our reach in general as it relates to our panels?
I think it was insightful. I feel like sometimes our panel formats are a little rushed because we have to go by the clock. We previously have done roundtables or like sexual assault. It was the idea of the leadership to do, like, instead of doing a panel. No, I don't think we would try to panel that one. We just went straight to a roundtable and replaced one of our meetings with a roundtable, just so that we could have more dialogue without the clock and the public, like everybody all, being, we couldn't really ask a lot of questions. But I think we covered some, initial points. I definitely think, certain areas are for a deeper dive, like some of the consistency. And it was amazing to hear about the Minnesota Avenue team. And then I was like, now granted, Minnesota Avenue has different issues than like a Good Hope Road corridor, because they have like a metro station, whereas we have, other things going on. But I wonder if there's, how do they assess like what is needed? And then staff the say passage routes. I think the students, that was the public witnesses, would have definitely loved more time to kind of pick their brains a bit. It was also interesting to mirror their points to what I was hearing from, going to the schools, because we're juggling a variety of perspectives, but all trying to work towards one goal of, what does safety look like and feel like for a variety of different people, and which might mean it's just a bunch of different solutions. But I guess I'm definitely like lingering on. I think I still stick to. I definitely like would like a. I definitely think we need to go back to like what how are safe passage workers being trained? What is in their scope of how to handle situations? What is their scope of like how they intervene? What should we as community members be even looking for? Like one of our students at Blue was kind of like, oh, the people in the green, they don't do anything. Now I'm not saying this is, but that was her perspective. And I never want our students to feel that, you know. So if it's reminding the core that, hey, it could be walking the block and scanning for any like state, like there's a pole hanging, you know, or like that's something to do if the, you know, if nothing's picking up or there's no students around or something like that. So I guess I'm curious into like what is in their scope so that like how can we get out to the community of like, here are the safe passage workers. They are a resource to do this. Here's how you can engage with them. I think there was a good campaign at one point during the school year to like highlight safe passage workers that were like going above and beyond through like a tweet if you catch them, you know, doing something great. Like that was a campaign that'd be cool to like, let's see if we can restart. But it was just interesting to kind of hear the panelists and then go back and then talk to students and get some more perspective about like what they were feeling. And it could be also that we have really great model in Minnesota Avenue corridor, and it's like, well, then how do we duplicate or beef it up in other parts of our city?
That makes a lot of sense. As a new member, I have a question about like the roundtable, and like how did the roundtable work, and like when is it possible to switch from, you know, like a panel to a roundtable? Is that just something that we can just say, you know what, we want to suggest going from a panel to a roundtable? And are there other formats as well that you've seen in the past that were helpful? And this also goes for you, Fraser. Hey, Fraser, how are you? Yep, me too. I think you're on mute, Fraser. Yeah, Carlene, you know, if you've seen any of those things.
I think it was just an ask. And actually at that time, it was pitched by leadership because the idea was kind of brought up as something that like I as a member witnessed, and it wasn't like a lot of time for the board to kind of pick it up. So we did like a roundtable. But I think it was also the leadership at the time, like introducing other strategies besides like paneling or just doing resolutions, even though we end up doing an addendum resolution. But I mean, I think it's just an ask. But also like a intention of like, what do we want to get out of the panel? Is it, and it could just be, or I'm sorry, the roundtable, it could just be like, we want more time with like some dedicated questions. I'm trying to think, we also came up with some questions with, and we kind of curated the list of who was invited to the roundtable. But it was more of a free form format. It was like a couple of members, like 7 different community groups present, and we just kind of sacrificed a meeting to have a roundtable.
I love that idea. I wonder if, you know, now that we're like updating the bylaws, if that's something where we have to, you know, connect and talk about the bylaws, or if that's just something that we can do. Either way, I love that idea, and I think that it provides us with a little more meat as far as the information that we can possibly get from our meeting. So thank you for that. I think another glow, I want to say another glow is Darren, you know, and Morelia, you all like were really like reaching out to everyone, and I thought that was super helpful. I think one of the grows is, I think, identifying students a little earlier. I think that was one of our challenges on this one, to really just like lock in students earlier. I know we were able to get a couple of them, you know, last minute, but, you know, really just, you know, having those relationships within the schools where we can reach out to the schools and get some students to come up and speak. I think that would be super helpful. Hey, Fraser, just to give you a heads up, one of the things we're talking about right now is a panel, like how we thought the panel went and what are some grows and glows. So like some areas that we thought went well and some areas where we thought we could improve. And so I'll just pause for another, couple seconds to see if you all wanted to add anything else to that as well.
I'm sorry I'm late, but the only thing that you just mentioned, what I mentioned to you about having student input, I thought was very important, but we should have, it would have been helpful to have a public school student and a charter school student. And maybe even someone who's on the SAC. It would make for a bigger panel. But I think it's always important to hear student voices with everything, since if the bottom line is that we're dealing with the students with the apostrophe after the S, future.
Yeah, I agree.
I think to follow up on Carlene was saying about the safe passage, I feel like there's an opportunity with the transfer of safe passage to Deputy Mayor of Public Safety. I imagine that they'll be looking at how they do training. This is an assumption, but it sounded to me like the safe passage members were doing, or staff were doing the OST training, which makes sense because that's what DME does and has. But I would think that there might be something different under Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. And it would be, I'm still curious how, like what that training is, how uniform it is, how they train people who come on board during the year, and how all that is coordinated with the other efforts. Like hopefully it will be more integrated if it's under public safety instead of DME, but I think we should kind of look to see if this is an opportunity or see what kind of changes are happening.
Okay. Thank you.
Something that also came up with the previous public safety panel, and I believe they're actually having this meeting. I'm not trying to tag on another meeting for SBOE reps, but Darren, if you remember, and I get everybody confused, maybe the one's office was talking about they were going to start having a meeting every Tuesday where all the agencies like get together to talk about like violence in the city. Well, it seems like according to my counselor, that meeting has started happening, and maybe once a month or quarterly at least, SBOE come to like voice whatever we're hearing from the community into that conversation. I also agree with Robert saying like the coordination of efforts is imperative, because again, living and breathing the shooting that happened in front of my house, I was like, I looked out the window the very next day after the first shooting happened, and I was like, I don't think our safe passage workers knew what popped off last night at 10:57 to only be followed by another week. And then all of a sudden it seemed like there was some vigilance that may have occurred, at least on the MPD side, but I'm still like, I don't know if our violence interrupters know what happened. So yeah, I'm hoping some of that coordination happens. But I know they from the first panel, I can't remember her name, she mentioned that they were going to like start a meeting. That meeting has started. It seemed like they might be interested in us or open to us participating, but I don't know if we need to like go once a week.
Yeah, I could follow up on that. I'll follow up on that. I know there are meetings every Tuesday with the, thinking on what, but it's the YAP work group at the Office of Student Advocate Youth Summit, but they do I believe monthly or every Tuesday they have meetings as well. So I could look into things that the state board can participate in around that.
And I'm going to shut up. Maybe even getting on their agenda to say like, this is what this is what reps have noticed about coordination around schools, or we've heard from community members, just so they can get like an education perspective. Not saying they're not getting it, but it might be worth, since we have held 2 panels, we have gotten some kind of public feedback to like see if we can get on their agenda.
In that panel that Carlene's talking about, that was the thing that came up that was so glaringly obvious and not being done, was the communication between the different agencies and organizations. Because they were all in the same room and talking about what they were doing, but when the question was asked, do y'all talk to each other? The answer was no. And that's kind of representative of what is happening in the government in DC right now, is one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And the only way that this, I mean, because all these people who have to do with violence interruption, I mean, those are the police, and those are the violence interrupters, and those are the safe passage people, and everybody else in the community, they all have the same goal, but they're not talking to you. They don't have the same objectives, if that makes any sense. And what Carlene's talking about, you know, it would be worth having, I mean, because that really came up at that panel, the panel before this last panel, about the lack of communication, but somebody's having a meeting with somebody, but does anybody else know that they're having a meeting?
And I think that also goes back to, you know, some of the things that we were talking about earlier with like the inventory and checking to see what's going on across the city so we can fill those gaps. So definitely something that we need to make sure we are, you know, paying attention to and putting in our plans as well. So I want to make sure I'm being cognizant of time. And I also know that Morelia has a report that she would like to share out. We would love to hear this information. So I'm going to pass this on to you, the floor is yours.
Hi. So I do want to preface this that this is something I did for my graduate studies. I decided to embark on research on youth safety and what that looks like, especially pulling away from community-based organization strategies to help amplify and keep our students safe. I took the perspective that youths are victims of violence, not perpetrators. And I think that's especially important when going into this work, is having those lenses and saying that youth are exposed, rather than taking a deficit mindset and saying that they're perpetrators. And I think that's really important, especially as you all navigate this work. And I also this is a national-wide research. I looked at research nationally across different researchers, not just in the DC context. So this is something that I found that was important, especially across the nation, because youth safety and violence is an occurring thing, and it's happening in a lot of urban cities right now. And it's not only affecting DC, it's affecting Chicago, Philadelphia, and big cities that we can take from and pull from, and really understand what's being done right now and what needs to happen as you all move this work forward. And so one of the big findings that I found is collective efficacy, and this idea that relational bond needs to happen across communities. And so one of the biggest things that I found in my research was that safe spaces for youth are usually embedded in dangerous contexts. And so youth are aware that when they leave their house at 7 a.m., they're aware of the dangers they experience throughout their journey by the time they come back at 7 p.m. And that is an important piece that I recommend you all going into and thinking about as you all navigate and are looking to work to solve and develop strategies to keep them safe. And so one important thing that I found across my finding was this idea of knowledge sharing and communication and building trust across networks. So when I say networks, I say school, neighborhoods, workplaces, parks, residential areas that youth touch. And so if youth are in these contexts, that is a network that they are inhabiting, and there needs to be cross collaboration, communication, and trust all within those networks. But how do we get to that? That's tough. That's something that researchers are still trying to navigate and learn from, because it's impossible to create this idea of cross collaboration if communication is not happening. And I'm happy that y'all touched on that, because that's an important piece that needs to happen. No collaboration or efforts of efficient collaboration can happen across agencies if there is no formal form of communication. And so in the policy memo that I shared with you all, I encouraged two forms of two recommendations, and that's one, that the state board should increase partnerships with youth-led organizations in DC that work to address youth safety issues. And I think it's important to look, when y'all are working to define what safety is, what the feeling of safety is for youth, is stepping away from an adult mindset and having youth provide that definition for you all. Because what adults define as safety is not what youth need oftentimes, especially when thinking about the use of SROs and other touchy feelings like that. You also have to say, how do they make youth feel? And a lot of and research has found, and I will say that youth, specifically brown and Black youth, believe police officers are unwilling to provide support in harmful situations, as they're aware that they are hyper-criminalized, especially in police interactions. And that's across a lot of different research that I've read and I kept finding, and was a recurring theme that's coming up. And so one thing that you all have to think about is encouraging these partnerships with youth organizations, in maybe supporting the SAC and partnering with youth-led organizations that are doing this work, and allowing them to come through, especially in policy spaces, that increases trust, not just with policy advocates and policy makers, so that they know their voice is heard, and are encouraging recommendations that center their experiences directly. And another recommendation that I provide you all is partnering with parent community organizations to develop initiatives around parental response to violence exposure. And so one of my sub themes that I found was that interfamilial networks and what happens inside those spaces correlated either to higher exposure or lower exposure of violence. And that's whether it's in a two-parent household or guardianship. You can still build a collaborative effort and network inside that, and that creates trust and knowledge sharing, not just within familial aspects, but also across neighborhoods that can say, hey, XYZ, my son or my cousin experienced this. I wanted to let you know informally, make you aware so that you can inform your student or your child. And so I think those are important aspects. And one of the things that how this may look like is partnering with parent organizations to either develop training modules to help enhance this idea of trust, not just in-house, but also trust across schools as well, because that's something that is always a gap in developing school and parent partnerships that often results in unawareness to violence exposure that a student may be experiencing as well. And creating a strong environment in what youth consider home and how youth see school is very essential in developing and fostering those communications that need to happen in foundational spaces. And so those are kind of two big recommendations that came out of some of my findings that I rooted in my findings for you all to consider as you move this work forward, because these are spaces that are important. Centering students are important. And one last thing that I would also recommend you all, when y'all engage with youth, also look at youth, also speak with youth that have been incarcerated and pushed out of the system, as well as undocumented youth. Because when you think about youth, like those youth that are exposed to violence and often pushed out of system, you also have to consider those communities that have been pushed out of schools as well, and why that led to that, and what might happen if this isn't addressed. And so there's a lot of layers to it, and having and going into it with different lenses is very important in centering youth at the forefront of the recommendations and the partnerships that come out of this work. So open to questions.
I would like to mention something. When you're talking about parents and children, and you know, we teach children, and some of us are parents, but we teach children, but the parental figures in the school building, the major parental figure is the principal or the administration, let's just say that. And I don't think that one of the things that, you know, we just got SROs, I guess, are going to be back in the school. When I was trying to figure out how to vote on that with the board a couple of years ago, I talked to police officers of color and how they felt about how many times they had been harassed by the police. And these are adult male, basically male police officers in DC. And they thought back on their youth and the number of times that they were harassed by the police. I would imagine the members of the city council, if they had polled the principals of all the schools in the city, the 95% of the principals would have said, we want to have SROs in the building. If they had polled all of the students in the buildings, I don't think they would have had 95, 85, 75, 65, 55% of the respondents to say they wanted to have police officers in the building. But the adults made the decision to get rid of the SROs and then to bring them back. But that's how the principals always want the SROs in the building. At all the meetings I went to when principals were asked those kinds of questions, because it was an extra, not only an extra body, but an extra body with authority on their hips. And that's a really interesting survey that you did, Morelia, because it sounds to me almost unanimous that students don't want SROs in the building. So I think even though the council has voted for it, we need to think about how we're going to react to that. And that's personal with me.
It was, and that was something I found across a lot of research, especially when seeing how Black and Brown youth experience or interact, or what they consider or deem safe around. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for the memo is really helpful, and making specific recommendations also really helpful. One of the things that I have been thinking about since the panel, I think it was the student who was on the panel, talked about community and feeling like expressing that we've lost some sense of community or feeling of community. And I've also been just trying to wrap my mind around, like, what are the communities that students experience? You know, especially given how many of our students are leaving their neighborhood to go to school. And just kind of, you talked about networks. So would you equate networks and communities, and like, I'm just trying to figure out like where sense of community might come from, or is it all of those things? And what you're talking about is like getting those to talk to each other.
Yeah, so good question. I think, and that's something y'all can go into when y'all do speak and survey and talk with youth and bring them into these spaces, is them defining what a community looks like for them and what their community is and what is their sense of belonging. Because ultimately they're going to choose the safest space for them at that time. And so when I speak about networks, I talk about networks are basically not just their neighborhood, but as well as the school network, as well as their work network. And if they go to parks and recreational areas, that's also another network within itself. And so it's these spaces that youth take space in that don't have a form of communication or knowledge sharing within them. that needs to happen, especially with, looking back at what happened, not just at that panel, but when we had students speak about what safety means to them through their testimony, other testimony. One of the students said that these recreational areas are what safety is to them. And so thinking back on saying, okay, well then how can we build cross communication collaboration with that network through school as well? Because there's a lot of, when we talk about safety, it's like you're unraveling a yarn ball that just keeps getting tangled. And one thing that has to happen is how do we untangle it to get these fine lines, but everything's attached. So this school network is attached to neighborhoods, even if school leadership isn't aware of that. Yeah, it's a web. School is attached to parks and recreational centers, even though it's not thought as that. Because if youth touch it, there's always, more than likely, it's all connected and interconnected. And so it's this effort of creating just a system of communication, but also trust within these aspects that needs to happen. And it's something that it's still being done in research, and how community and what role community organizations play in that, especially those that have done the work. But it just takes time in sustaining those partnerships and fostering partnerships outside of schools and across neighborhoods that may influence that level of communication that needs to happen.
Yeah, I'm thinking based on your feedback, Mariah, like, I think it's important that we get in buildings. So I know I told you, say like, hey, can you come to this panel? Or even the dynamic of our SAC, right? It's still hosted by the SBOE. I found it eye-opening to go to Anacostia and Ballou, and I wish I need to figure out how to get into KIP, like, to hear their perspectives, because I literally told I told Ballou, I was like, wow, like I could walk from Anacostia to Ballou if I got my good walking shoes on in probably an hour. And they had very different perspectives about what they wanted for their school community. And it was just kind of eye-opening. And then same thing, I was smiling when you said what students' perceptions of safety are, because I asked the students at Anacostia, like, I said, do you feel safe coming to school? And they all were like, yeah. And I was like, we live in the same neighborhood, friends, but that's me with my adult lens. But then also with my adult lens to then turn that day and found out the student at Roosevelt, or the student or a child was shot in the parking lot of two schools. And to hear like my students say they had no fear, to seeing the, a really disturbing reality, to then less than a week later go to Ballou and they're like, we want a Metro Transit bus that just is dedicated to our school. We do want police in our school, where Anacostia students were like, no, thank you. Even the perspectives of who is what, like, they're like, I don't care if it's a security guy. It was just very interesting to hear. So I think like, I know sometimes we do things under framing of like community groups or bringing students, but it was something very authentic about going unrehearsed. Like, I don't think we had any real questions. We just kind of like let them talk, ask a couple pointed questions, but like there was no prepping, priming, maybe some bribing with pizza happened at Anacostia. Ballou was probably a more curated group, I think, where we probably missed out the students who, are the ones that like, need the extra love and care. But I think all of them were saying they wanted love and care. But I was kind of like, this is the room that, I'm like, I'm not really worried about y'all when I had that Blue meeting. But I think I definitely like hear some of the points reflected in what you said. But I think I'll just say, we probably, as much as possible, like need to just get into, if buildings that will let us in without any rehearsed student thoughts, and let students know that it's a protected space. And they were sharing their ideas about everything. And it was just very interesting because it was very different sometimes what they were pitching from like some of the things that we've done legislation about, we've done resolutions about what they want for their future. So
That's great, Carly.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, I think I draw a correlation to that to when I used to do like home visits. You're meeting people where they are. So you're meeting the students on their home turf, and they feel safe. They can tell you everything like how it is, and you're also a lot like more likely to get more when you're there. So thank you for the work that you did at Anacostia and Baloo, and I can definitely I can get you into KIP. That's not going to be an issue. I can make that happen.
But definitely would like to duplicate that like amongst members. Like it would just be interesting if every
I
member
agree.
were to come back with the report out of a Friday just spent with 15 kids from a random high school in their ward about what you would hear versus the things that we, we say, tweet, we see, that kind of stuff.
And I think I don't know about you, the rest of you. I actually love that idea, and I would actually love to push that as part of our plan if possible. So I'm behind that 1,000%, and would also do that in my ward. But I'm looking at time. I want to I know we've gone a bit over. Darren, if we could just go over the working plan and discuss what's next, and then kind of wrap this up. So far, thanks again for all of this insightful discussion that you all have provided us so far today.
Thanks, and a huge thank you to Morelia. Again, she's with us until mid-June, so if you do have any follow-up questions, certainly reach out to her. She is a wealth of knowledge. And the Healthy Schools facility. You've done great on both. In the chat, I shared the work plan. Brandon, shall I share my screen as well? So as staff, we created a combined work plan just to look at everything going on with all the committees, but also the bylaws, student advisory, school community and well-being. I'm going to go through this quickly just because of time, but then I'll share specifically the school community and well-being. But by clicking the link, the first tab in green, you could see everything. And so looking at everything, kind of looking back and thinking of the timing of some of these projects. And so just a few things I wanted to highlight were the surveys and focus groups that were going to occur in fiscal year 23. Staff just discussing this work plan and everything going on, moving that out to later in October, still aiming for a report in December, but using fiscal year 24 money to pay for a vendor for a focus group, and using the summer to discuss what do we want to learn from this survey, what would this survey look like, who are we going to reach out to, using the summer to build that out for the survey and the focus group, but then finding participants and opening the survey and opening the focus groups in October or maybe early November to get a lot more engagement now that school is open and now that everybody is sort of settled in. So in terms of updating this, I can follow up with you offline on just like updates on this, but that was one thing. The other was the seizure safe schools. On the work plan, we had having a June panel, but since we're voting on a resolution at the June public meeting, instead moving that to or changing that to just building out the resolution. So Jen and I are working on drafting a resolution that will definitely work with you all on and share out the draft. But at the June public meeting, we'll have a supporting educator growth and development panel instead. I think those were some of the high level changes for this. And again, changing the that budget item to fiscal year 24 instead of fiscal year 23. Brandon, was there anything else that I might have missed?
No, I think this is accurate. Yeah, I don't think you missed anything.
And then going, and for the website, we're working to update the website. And like you said, just having a lot of these, the plan, like a timeline, but also a definition and the parameters around like what safety means would be part of that. But working offline with everyone on the layout of what that website would look like. So when the public wants to learn more about this committee and the work that they're doing, what would be on that website? That's something that we're working to update. It's not something as easy as us fixing it on our end. It's something that we have to work with the tech office to help us update the state board website. So there is that, but I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but
Yeah.
I hope that was helpful.
In the chat, Robert asked if I was working with Councilmember Allen on the Caesar Safe Schools legislation, and the answer is yes. So he is on board and waiting to see what we come up with, and will likely be the one to introduce. Robert White has already also indicated that he'd be on board to support it as well, and also talk to Trayon as well. So it's looking good for right now.
Are we starting as a resolution on the board first, or just going straight to possibly legislation?
Resolution first.
Oh, cool. Because I would love to tag on those points that, I mean, I love, yes, seizure for sure. That was eye-opening. And then even to hear people tag on that weren't the parent and the other student. But also just worried me about some of the other elements of medical things that they were talking about in regards to like the nursing contract, where like whoever they're contracted with, I don't want to say a name, like can't do everything, but we want nurses in schools. And then I'm also still worried because of the if they're having this response to seizures, they're probably having the same response to allergies. And I know because the grandma had a child who something was in the food, made a child have a reaction, and just even that coordination back around there. So it's kind of like definitely works with seizure safe, but I'm also just curious about some of those other medical elements that are going on in school, and how can we like maybe just tag on a couple lines in our resolution about, and here are a couple other things to think about schools.
I like that. I like that a lot. So I know that I think Jen and Darren are going to be working on that together. So definitely, if you have some time to connect with the two of them to add on to it. I know there's going to be several iterations of it, but I think that, you know, everything that you're saying is spot on. And so let's make sure that we do have something that we can present, but something that also hits on some of those other issues that we know are major issues as it relates to ensuring our students are safe when they're in school medically. So I don't have anything else that I want to go over. If there is anything that you all would like to introduce as new business, please share that now. All right. Oh, cadence. I did want to review the cadence of the meeting. I think that Robert and I think we came to, I'm not sure if we came to a conclusion, but we were saying that the meetings would probably happen the fourth Wednesday of every month until we feel like we've gotten to a good place with our plan. And so just wanted to check to see if that works with everyone, with this being the same time, but the fourth Wednesday of every month. Cool. If there are some challenges with that, just send me a note, send me a note, send Darren a note, and we'll work around schedules. Once again, thank you for your flexibility, everyone. Thank you for letting me know when there are conflicts so we can make sure that we have the team together. We are a small but powerful team. And so I look forward to continuously working with you all and get some of this stuff done. So you can have your time back, and thank you. Take care, everyone.
Great.
Thanks.
Bye.